All right, I am going to go ahead and get us started. Thank you for joining today. A couple of logistical notes before we get moving here. One, please engage, interact, heckle even. I love being heckled. I do my best work while being heckled. You can message each other directly, you'll notice, if you go into the chat in Zoom. You can message individual people. You can message the entire group, everyone. You can also just message the host and panelists. It's myself and our host, Lindsay, from the Integral team here. Please use that chat. Feel free to post questions in there, post comments, share your own experiences. I'll actually be asking a couple of questions for folks to post answers in the chat. Please feel free to be eating and doing whatever you're doing, enjoying your lunch. Thank you for spending your lunch with me. But also make sure you found that chat and are ready to interact there. We are not the kind of people around here that will make you furiously take notes during the session because you're never going to see it ever again. In fact, you will get a copy of this entire presentation and the materials. There's, as you see on the top here, there's some other materials I'll be sharing. These will actually be available to you as links in this presentation that I'm showing. So that will be coming to you after the session. So don't worry about needing to take notes or soak it all in. You'll have the opportunity to go gather and look at these things in more depth later if you so desire. And finally, if you didn't see already, as you probably did when you came in, this webinar is being recorded. We will also be posting that recording. So you will be able to go see that on our YouTube channel, share it with others, refer back to it if there's something that you particularly found valuable. So I hope that sets you at ease to engage and be present and enjoy what we're offering here. Before I jump in, invite everyone to just take a minute, take a deep breath. Welcome to lunch in the webinar. My name is Paul. I'm a senior product manager here at Integral. My job is really everything but writing the code for delivering software, right? So I help our teams and our clients and anyone else that cares about the software we're building to get to results. And a huge part of how I do that is through backlogs. I call this backlog 401 because these are really pretty foundational principles. If you've done workflow management or task management or project planning at all, a lot of these ideas will be pretty familiar to you. At the same time, I want to bring them to you in a way that hopefully helps you continue to develop your mastery of how you use the tools that you're using to get stuff done and to ultimately get results. So for me, before we start, I want to talk about this. What is a backlog? If you could post your answers in the chat, what is a backlog? Give folks a second to post in the chat. I also thank you. I see a few folks still jumping in now as well. Feel free to jump into that chat, post your answers to this question. Make sure you're posting it to everyone in this case so that everyone can see. Kevin, you may want to send that back to everyone. It's also fine to answer, I don't know. Cool, I like what I'm seeing. Work items. Ooh, upcoming sprints. Now we're getting fancy agile language. A list of stuff to do. For me, there's two things that I find a large log at the back. Thank you, Shark. Really appreciate that. Yes, it is not the front log, it is the backlog. Here's my two key things that I think are important. It's a list of work and a way of managing getting it done. I think, yeah, Kevin, I liked your a list of work to do, a list of stuff to do. I think one of the things that's important for me to acknowledge about a backlog is I don't know yet if it's stuff to do. I just know that it's a list of work that we think we might need to do, that we hope we need to do, that we think is important to do. And that's why the second bullet is important, a way of managing getting it done. Second question, I am curious, the thing about it, so we use this word backlog a lot in software development, but the reality is all of us, as the wonderful, beautiful, competent humans we are, do a lot of work, and we often make lists of work, and we have ways of managing getting it done. I'm curious if people have other tools, systems, or words. That could be a software tool, It could be a structure or title or name you have for it. What are the ways that you list your work and get it done? Post-its. Give folks a second to drop those in the chat. Oh, Devin, I like that definition of backlog as well. Ideally, often a backlog is all the things that we could do, which allows us to then figure out what we want to do, need to do. So how do you manage your work? What's the way that you get lists of work in order and manage getting it done? Feel free to just drop that quickly in the chat. Could be the specific name of a software tool, like I use Things as a software tool for managing a lot of my tasks, daily tasks and projects and areas of responsibility. I like the getting things done methodology. Oh, I see Jira there, common tool. So that some of us don't always like. Rally, yep, is another common tool. Anyone use Post-its? I sometimes love Post-its, particularly if I'm in motion around my house. They can be useful to me and they feel good. So there's a lot of different tools we can use. Yes, the Notes app. Yep. Yes, and finding a way to attach your dopamine to your task list can be important, and tools can help you do that. Stickies. And a whiteboard. Yeah, I'll also be showing a couple of tools during the session, specifically using Miro, which is a digital whiteboard. And then Notion has tracker boards. Trello has these as well. Rally, Jira have these as well. And so I'll be showing some tools here. In a way, what I want today, mostly for you, before we jump into the actual content itself, kind of in finishing closing here, or finishing opening, closing opening, yes, is to have tools that allow you to deliver results, whether you are using stickies, a whiteboard, whatever it is that happens to give you a dopamine hit today, your Notes app, Trello, Notion backlog boards, Rally, Jira, etc. Ultimately, the only reason, from my perspective, that it matters to list out your work and manage it is to get results. There's something you want to make happen that's valuable to you, and you want to get results. And so my hope in sharing these guiding principles with you today and some of the ways that we apply them here at Integral and that I've found really effective to apply them in my own practice is that you're able to build an effective backlog, or whatever you want to call your work management system. No matter what your context, no matter what team you're working with, you have some tools that allow you to go, okay, what's going to help get the results I want here? And the same, you may probably already have systems you're using, as many of you just listed, but what can you go do to make them more awesome? How can you make them get you better results? For me, these particular principles help me deliver results consistently and more effectively and more efficiently because they allow me to use our backlog structures, workflow management systems, to remove confusion and disappointment. I think we've all been in situations where you thought you knew what you needed to do, but you didn't, or you got a work ticket item, a request from someone, you got told you had an action item and you were confused about what to do, or you thought you knew what to do, but then when you delivered it, the person was like, what is this? This is not what I asked for. And then it turns out that you wish you had had a better system for understanding the work and or making sure you were clear on expectations. And so that leads to the second point here of these principles for me help me make sure that everybody, all stakeholders, you should note down there, anyone, for me, that's anybody that cares about what we're doing and the work itself, the deliverables themselves, has a single source of truth, really ideally a link or a picture, somewhere I can send them where they can go see what we're doing and where it's at. And that single source of truth helps everybody stay aligned. To a couple of the ideas I heard in the chat, this principle says we'll talk through in a little more detail can help me optimize for the work not done. Often we really focus on what we need to get done, but are we focusing on how we make sure we're doing the most valuable things and avoid doing work that isn't particularly valuable? And lastly, to the delivering results, ultimately, I want to see brilliant ideas turned into some valuable outcome, and consistently these principles help me do that. In my case, that's often Prod Software, although at other times in my life, it's been the house I'm currently standing in. I did a lot of renovations on. It was a dilapidated mansion when I bought it. I have a camper van that I did myself. I'll often use some of these tools for planning vacations. And so they apply to almost anything. You're planning events. They apply to almost anything where you have a valuable outcome and you want to take something from an idea to actually happening effectively well in reality. That's my pitch. I'm going to jump into the principles. Remind you, as I jump through these, feel free to tell me if you need me to slow down or go back to something or have a question. I'm happy to do so. Otherwise, I will continue moving through the content. So I've got 5 principles I want to share with you. We're going to go through these one at a time, but I thought it'd be quickly just to flash them on screen here. They're kind of in 3 groups for me. Or 2 groups for me. The first 3 are about how you structure the work, how you structure and manage the work. And the second 2 are really kind of more cultural, about how we work as a team and how we set up a culture that effectively uses the work structure that we've put in place. So we'll walk through all 5 of these one at a time, but specifically wanted to call out, we'll probably spend quite a bit of time on the first 2 because that's really about how you build your work structure. And then the third one is about how you use it to manage work. And then the last 2 are about team culture. Let's jump in. Set purposeful and flexible buckets and levels. I use buckets because I have heard these called projects and tasks or areas of responsibility in projects and tasks. I've heard them called epics, sub-epics, features, and stories. I've heard them called work items or tickets or cards. There's a lot of names, and I'm sure 10, 15, 20 years from now, there'll be other names. Probably if I do a bunch more research, I could find a bunch of historical names for how we have titled the way that we organize work. And so I actually find these kind of general terms a little useful because they remind me that no matter what terminology I'm using, I've got a bucket of work. And those buckets often fit in another bucket of work. And those then have levels, right? So there's very specific buckets of work that then are in a more general bucket of work. It's a way of organizing work, right? And so in the way we organize our work, I want it to be purposeful, also flexible. I want to know exactly why we do it the way we do it, what each of these buckets, each of these levels is for, but also know that it can flex and serve the needs of any given work item or group of people to get to those results. These questions help me do that as far as thinking about, do I really need all these buckets and levels I have set up? If so, who needs them and why and for what? At the same time, asking, hey, are there people that care about our work that if they came and looked at our backlog, our work structure, they would not make sense to them? They wouldn't be able to follow it or it wouldn't meet their needs. If so, maybe I should organize my work a little differently and make sure every group of stakeholders has their needs met. And finally, really getting clear for me as we set those buckets and levels about who owns them, even down to each individual ticket or work item within a bucket or a level. To illustrate how I apply this, I actually want to jump into this sample inception outcome. And note this link here, when you get this presentation, will take you to this Miro board. Just talk about what we're looking at here for a second. This isn't an actual inception that we did at Integral, but this looks a lot like what we have gotten out of many inceptions that we've done with our clients. The idea of an inception is this is our launch meeting. We get everyone on the team together. In this case, I've listed the team at the top here of this Miro board. And we say, what are we trying to do together? In this case, the core question was, how can we build a custom project management solution? A little meta here, right? We're talking about managing the work, and we're going to build software that can manage projects. And so in this situation, I'm showing you what it would look like for us to do an inception with a client that was asking this core question. Our team, we had executive sponsors, the business owners, perhaps here, Alexis and Ella, as well as some product owners, some employees of theirs that have been assigned with doing the work alongside our team to deliver this project management solution that they need and the software we're going to build for that. And then we've got our dev team, a product manager like myself, along with 6 engineers that are going to deliver this. And what you've got down below here, this is just the legend showing you what each of these cards is as far as the kind of bucket or level it is. And then notice I've marked per my questions that I asked the specific stakeholders that are the audience and owners for that level. And then here I've done 2 different versions of the exact same work. And I'll share a little bit more about why the one on the left falls short a little bit and why the one on the right is stronger. And that has to do with applying those questions. So as we come into Inception, we're going to talk through a lot of things with a client about their business, about why this particular engagement and work matters to them, what they're hoping to get out of it, who the users are that they serve, what specific use cases we want to deliver to, all those kinds of pretty standard questions. But our core goal at the end of this day-long project time together, working time together, is to get a backlog, a starter backlog. And to build that together throughout the day is what we're building towards. And so this is the core outcome of an Inception for us. In applying this first principle, you'll notice there are systems that also have a sub-epic, or systems that only have features and stories, or systems that only have epics and stories, or have different names, projects and tasks, deliverables and stories, or work tickets. Whatever you call them, what we did with this client was recognize, hey, we need a way, the epics, that the product owners here, AJ and Juan, as the people working day to day with us, and the business owners can be really clear about a big ticket item that we're going to deliver. And so we identified 3 of those core big ticket items that we needed to deliver to answer this project management solution question throughout the day. And so this ticket level really allows them to have a clear conversation about those 3 big ticket items, what they mean, what's supposed to be in them. So we can even have specific requirements under each of these 3 tickets. And then the features, we realized we also wanted to have a way that the product owners and the dev team here could interact together. And so this gives a language that still is identifying a deliverable, a thing that's going to matter to these product owners to help them get to the big ticket item they've agreed on with their boss, the business owner. But really is working with our dev team to say, hey, can you give me a thing that does this? And then this, and ultimately that is adds up, the features add up to the epic. And then finally, the story is really for the dev team. That's our way as a dev team of identifying something that takes a day or 3 or maybe 5 or 6, but ideally is a pretty quick item to get done. We work in pairs of engineers. You'll notice we assigned pairs of engineers to these cards as we got started. But also notice that often the audience for the stories, the individual work items, is everybody. If Alexis and Ella show up on day 7, they might say, hey, what are you guys working on today? And we want to be able to take them to the stories and say, hey, we know you've seen the epics and the features, but here's the things that we're doing today, tomorrow, right now to deliver towards that. Some of that thinking about who these are for and how to make sure that these are meaningful to those stakeholders then leads to some of the differences between these 2. I've seen wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, starter build, launch MVP, enhancements, et cetera, used a lot. Those aren't bad terms, but they're also not particularly meaningful terms. If AJ and Juan and Alexis and Ella at the epic level are trying to have a conversation about scope and priority, they might miss things if they just say wave 1 or wave 2 or wave 3. But if they have really meaningful titles for those, this now communicates to them as the audience and owners of this what they're doing. It also allows them to communicate to other stakeholders, maybe other business partners, maybe the users of this software themselves will be able to make a lot more sense of these cards on the right than on the left. And so this is a way that we use epic level things like this to make sure that the key decision makers have a level that is titled and meaningful to talk about what we're delivering. You'll see there's some similar changes around the titles of the features here, where we're making sure to be clear what a user is going to be able to do, because that allows the product owner to validate, yes, that's what I want the user to do. I don't know if a checkbox page and supporting infrastructure that makes sense to me as a technologist, and probably makes a lot of sense to a lot of us, but why? Versus allow users to create a list of items. And so again, thinking about how words matter and audience matters, the product owners now can more quickly go, oh yeah, here's what really is important about allowing users to create a list of items, and use that to communicate back up to Alexis and Ella as well when they have questions about priority or the specific requirements in these features. Similarly, it's tempting at the story level as a dev team to give technical titles like set up MongoDB. to a card. If Alexis and Ella happened to walk in, the business owners, tomorrow though, and say, "Oh, you're setting up MongoDB. I don't know what MongoDB is. That's why I hired you." Now I have to explain MongoDB to them. And we might actually often have confusion as a team about what does set up MongoDB mean? Versus if I say create a list item database, sure, we had a discussion as a team that we were going to use MongoDB because that was the kind of database that we wanted to use, or the specific tool that the customer had already paid for, or whatever. But the key thing we were doing that anyone that looks at that card might care about is creating a list item database. So that's how we structure creating the initial buckets and levels of them, and making sure they clearly communicate to the stakeholders involved. To the last question that I shared about ownership, notice we even, at inception often, we will assign owners, ideally, for each of these cards. We know who's going to be responsible for driving us to success and delivery on each of the key cards. Some of the later ones, you'll notice we haven't assigned an owner yet. We knew that these weren't as key to drive forward right now because we weren't going to be working on them yet. But as some of these first items get going or closer to done, an owner would be assigned here. We'll show a little bit more of that in the workflow boards next. Those owners are really helpful because sure, we're all going to collaborate. We're all going to jump in. Everyone's input is really important. But there's someone who's a single hand to shake, right? The single person that we know. And then they also know, clearly, we know that that's the person that we look to for the answers about that particular work item. But they also know that they're on the hook for helping make sure that happens and for coordinating everyone around getting that work done. So at the end of an inception, we've got a workflow, to go back to this slide, that has buckets and levels that are needed by all of our stakeholders and meet the needs of all of the people involved. And we've assigned clear ownership to those work items. And we have a way to keep assigning ownership as work items get prioritized and ready to be worked on. That leads me to the second principle that I find incredibly powerful in managing work. So now the work's going to start moving. We call that workflow, right? A work management system. And I find it incredibly helpful to make sure there are workflow gates to shepherd ideas to prod. The gates just being the statuses, the columns in a Kanban board, the ways that we identify where the work is at and how it can go from, cool, that sounds like a good idea, to we finish doing the work. I say prod because in the world of software, ultimately, if you build a bunch of software, but it never makes it to production and being used by real users to make real money, you didn't really build anything. It's like building a house or a building, an office that no one ever lives in or works in, right? So in your world, you can identify what is the key goal for you that defines getting results, and how can you set up a structure of gates that will get the ideas into existence and reaching that goal and result. For me, there's two key questions that guide that. What gates most accurately reflect the decisions being made around here? So who makes those decisions, in what order, to go from, yep, that's a great idea, to, yep, let's do it and build it, to, yep, it's ready to go to our customers. And second, how can we coordinate the work? How can we identify blockers, dependencies, the best order, the most efficient order for things to go in? And how can our workflow and the way the gates are set up to support that? There is a lot. You'll see there's a link here to the sample workflow. There is a lot in this board. I set up a model board for us that shows how we might set this up for this particular client and apply some of these principles for the workflow gates. I'm not going to go through all of it in detail, but I'll give a few examples to show how we applied the logic. So remember, epics were for Alexis and Ella, the business owners, and AJ and Juan, the product owners. And so here in our epic board, we recognize that there would be at these big ticket levels, there would be scoping, making sure, yeah, we have a pretty clear sense at that high level of what we're trying to build there. We also recognized, per coordinating the work, that while we didn't need to have all the UX, UX is the fancy software word for designs of a page or a data model the customer will see, or the technical architectural design, we didn't have all of it done, but we at least wanted to know what needed to be done to help then coordinate getting that work done as we started to move into features and stories. So we didn't want to move a work item out of scoping, until we were clear on the acceptance criteria. The ACs, as I call them here, is what we often use, the requirements. You'll hear people use that language, success criteria. That would define what this needed to look like when it was done, and also some of the coordination of the design work that would need to happen as this started to move forward. From there, we decided, cool, if Alexis and Ella and AJ and Juan are aligned at that high level, we can start developing work on the features under this epic. And then we can call it delivered once we look and say, yep, we've done everything we can to meet all those ACs. They seem to be met, note, or descoped or split out. We might decide that we thought some things needed to be done but didn't need to be done, or we put them into a new epic or a feature elsewhere. And we've demoed that software. We've shown the software to our stakeholders, and everyone generally agrees that this epic is done. And so we call that delivered. Then we also realized that at this big ticket item level, we wanted to recognize that some things maybe had been delivered and shown to Alexis and Ellie and AJ and Juan and any of the users that they were having review things. But when had something been released into production for everyone to use? Similarly, we made decisions. I won't go through these in quite as much detail, and you could welcome to come back and look through them and shoot questions. Made similar decisions for the feature board, except in this case, we're looking to serve the decisions that the product owners and the dev team will make together to get each feature. And notice, if I didn't point this out on the Epic board, it's a little more obvious there, but these are the exact same cards as the inception. On our Epic board, I took our 3 cards here, and now they're in a flow structure that allows us to move the work from one step to the next with clear criteria for what decisions have to be made to move work forward. Also the same features from inception now put into this board with a clear set of decisions that will take us from, cool, we decided in inception the idea of what we were going to build for these features. Now we need to get it to reality, released to users in production. A little more complex. This is often common as your work item levels get and your buckets get more into the weeds. Your board, your gates, your statuses might get more complex. And so in this case, we realized that we wanted a way to first do scoping with the business with just AJ and Juan. I'm sure our engineers would have input and help us with scoping that, but at least getting to the point where we agreed that the business was clear on what this feature meant, what the acceptance criteria were, and that the design needs. And if we had any research to go do, we often call those POCs, proof of concept, or spikes. That we had those at least identified, and often we might start playing those during business scoping. But we've agreed this at least has reached this level of clarity, and we can move it forward into delivery scoping. And we realized there was a point then where the dev team would want to then get into the weeds on the feature, actually play those spikes and POCs, mark any blockers or dependencies on, ooh, we need to figure this out before we can start the work. We need to make sure to play the stories in a specific order, or we can't play this before that. And so we didn't want to move any work into actual development until all of these exit criteria had been made and decisions had been made about each feature. And then it can move to developing. Team can actually begin working the stories to get this feature done. Once we know that all the dev work is completed, we can then move it to delivered and then move it to ready to release. Again, note the decisional exit criteria at each phase that allow the product owners and the dev team, the two audiences and owners of this particular feature board level, to make those decisions together and keep moving the work forward from idea to actually being software in use and prod. Similarly, our storyboard. Here we realized we needed ways to understand as a dev team where the work was at and make decisions, and then make sure we were getting approvals from the product owners when we needed that at the right times. So we have some icebox space to Davin's point about a backlog as a list of anything you could think of. We might throw a lot of stuff in the icebox that we're not even for sure going to do, but we don't want to lose that task. So this is a catch-all space for that. This is the work we've actually defined as a team and are using these exit criteria to get it to the point where a pair of engineers could grab that story from the top of the defined and begin playing it. And then a team review space. The work is done. The engineers are done with the work, but we want to look at it as a team together and make sure it's good to go. So we have decisional criteria for that. Then we pass it on to the business for their review. And then we say, cool, we can ship it into our prod ready software. and continue to allow the feature and the epic process to move as these stories end up adding to features that are done and then epics that are done. Back up to then our principles. These gates that we've set for each level allow us to reflect the decisions that need to be made at each level by the people that are involved and responsible at that level, and coordinate the work as it moves through. That brings us to the third principle. Prio everything, everywhere, all the time. It's really easy when you walk out of an inception to think, so this is it. We're just going to walk through this. Often people call this waterfall style delivery. You've decided how the next 3 months are going to go. Reality seldom actually works that way, if ever. Please tell me if you've had times it does. What really happens is we learn things all along the way. Priority changes for a variety of reasons. And that's where these gates become incredibly important because they allow us to prioritize everything, everywhere, all the time. As the work flows through, we can be really clear on which stories in each column have the highest and the lowest priority, which features, which epics. And we can make sure that then if there's something about a specific feature or a specific epic, that the stories are prioritized according to meeting that priority order. That leads to this other question of the owner of prioritization. I did not talk about this in Inception, but when I talked about our Inception outcome, but particularly when there's multiple people in a box at a level here, we will ask our clients to specifically define an owner for prioritization. So we might say, Alexis and Ella, one of you needs to ultimately have the tiebreaker vote on the priority of the epics, which one's first, which one's second, which one's third. Same thing for the features. Someone ultimately has the tiebreaker vote on the correct order of priority for the features. And sure, AJ and Juan may work to own that together, but who ultimately is responsible for deciding that priority is really important. And then also think using this to unblock and accelerate the team. Fire drills happen all the time, but they're often not unblocking or accelerating the most important work. And so one of the first questions I will ask myself is, I want to unblock the highest priority work and accelerate the highest priority work, and be asking my team the questions of, hey, how can I unblock and accelerate you on the most important stuff versus pulling us into fire drills on something that ultimately may not be important for another week or two. Lastly, I'll visit this top question. Be really clear on when and how prioritization is revisited and validated. It can happen anywhere and anytime. You can go shift around the order of priority of your cards. However, it's useful to have ceremonies to do that. For us, that's our daily stand-up. Every day, we will come in and look at our storyboard as a team and make sure we're clear. What's priority for today? Who's on first for each of these stories? And what needs to happen for them? And do we all understand that? Does anyone need help? Does anyone need unblocking and accelerating? Is anyone maybe focusing on something over here that isn't priority that we could say, oh, maybe could we set that aside and focus on this high priority work, which could use more help on that? We also have weekly and monthly and even quarterly ceremonies, sessions for looking at priority of the feature board and the epic board to validate those. What I find helpful about that is that while I want to be regularly just moving priority anytime we realize that one of these features actually needs to move up or down in priority in any given status of work gate here, I also find those checkpoints helpful to make sure we didn't miss something, that if I made a change throughout the week or my product owner made a change throughout the week or a team member advocated for a change and we made it, that we, or a stakeholder even, sometimes you have a user bring up a thing that causes you to reprioritize features or stories in your work. And so those meetings are essential to just really look at the board at each level and say, is this currently still prioritized accurately? And if not, let's quickly reset the priority, and then we take that back into our day-to-day. I'm going to pause there. That was a lot. Questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We've gotten through 3 principles that will help you build and manage a workflow system, a backlog structure. And I'm going to jump into a couple of cultural points to head us toward closing out using these principles to guide your workflow. Right, so 2 cultural principles we go through. Here's the first one. On our teams, I want to work as hard as I can to plan for and welcome ongoing discovery. What is ongoing discovery? You can learn things about the work all the time in the same way that priority, we thought this was the order we would do everything in the priority at the beginning at inception. But a day in, a week in, a month in, as we get doing the work or as the world around us changes, we might realize that this thing down at the bottom is the most important thing. We might realize that things at the top are the least important. These are going to shift. But we also might realize that what we thought we needed to build here is different. We might realize that the specific technology we're going to use is not the best idea, that a thing we thought would be easy to do is really hard to do. And so we need to change the scope, change the requirements, change the design of what we're doing to actually still get to our goals. So ongoing discovery is anything we learned along the way we discovered that actually tells us how to get to our results in a way we didn't understand at the beginning. I've heard people use the phrase, yeah, we want ongoing discovery to be safe. You can raise a risk, an issue, a requirement anytime. I don't want to just make it safe. I want to celebrate it. So for us at those ceremonies that I mentioned, a daily stand-up, our weekly priority review, we want to be like, oh my God, I'm so glad. Thank you that you brought up this risk or issue. I know it's a pain. It's awful because now your story is blocked and it's not going to get done. And that's causing a whole disaster over here. And the business owner is actually stressed out because they've been asking us every day about that. But I'm really glad because if we just shoved that work through without acknowledging that risk or issue or requirement, and getting that ongoing discovery on the table, we would have made bad decisions. We might have delivered bad software that doesn't meet the needs. We wouldn't have ultimately gotten to the result, or we would have gotten to it in a way that was problematic. And so I want our team to be able to celebrate those discovery moments, document them into our backlog in wherever that goes in our features and stories and epics. And make sure that we understand the impact that that has on what we need to do. And then we can work through that with our product owners, with our sponsors or business owners or executives to make sure that we use what we're learning along the way to make better and better decisions, to get better and better results. Second question on plan for and welcome ongoing discovery for me is really a facilitative thing that in a lot of ways helps with the first. If the teams we're working with feel like I, as the product manager, am the only person that can edit the feature or edit the stories, or only the tech lead can write new stories, or only the business owners could change something about the epics or whatever. Obviously, you don't want to walk in and step on someone else's toes. But the beauty of most modern tools for this is there's tracking. You can add it as a note in highlight or a suggested change in highlight or whatever. But it goes straight into the backlog. So if an engineer on our team is working and realizes that we need to do additional work, like they're doing one of these stories and realize, oh, actually, there's a whole other thing that we don't have a task for yet, a story for yet, and we need to do that. I want them to just go write the card. I mean, they can drop me an email, they can shoot me a Slack message, that's fine too. But I want them to know that ultimately they can go in and directly document a question, a comment, a risk, an issue, a potential new requirement or a change in requirements in highlights, in comments, whatever, in the backlog. And that empowers the team to celebrate the ongoing discovery and to do it efficiently and effectively so that it doesn't get missed. And that's what it looks like for me to plan for and welcome ongoing discovery. This last principle for me, capture everything in the backlog, is really about, in some ways, checking that all of what I just said above is really happening, is really working. So ideally, every bit of meaningful work to get to results that our team does is in the backlog somewhere, in the workflow structure. If there is something that we are doing on the team to deliver the results and it's not in the backlog, I want to ask myself, what would it take to get it there? Why is it off the backlog and how does it get into the backlog? Those questions are often, that question is often then revealing because I realize, oh, actually, like we don't really have a feature for capturing some technical work that we're doing that we didn't realize would be important previously, but we now know. And so we will write a feature to cover that technical work or prod support work, or if we have folks that are integrating with our software and we realize we need to meet some of their specific requests. And so we'll add a feature. I've even seen this question result in adding a level to your backlog. Like, oh, we're doing a bunch of stuff because we really need sub-epics as well to help organize the work better, or we need to allow stories to go directly under an epic or directly under a sub-epic instead of just under features. They reveal things about how we need to get work done to get results. We're just doing it because the team wants to get to results, but we don't have a way of organizing and documenting that work. And that can help us make our backlog better by realizing, well, it's necessary to get to the software. What would it take to make sure our workflow system can represent that kind of work? The other question I find helpful in thinking about how to bring everything into your backlog that you need to do to get results is asking where are your requirements coming from, who's feeding them to you. It might be those executive owners or the product owners. It might be marketplace research. It might be actually users. It might be the team itself. It might be designers. It might be security folks telling you that you have to make sure that you meet the security requirements of this organization and building your software. It might be regulatory agencies. Anyone that's going to directly feed us requirements, especially more than once, if they're going to have interactions with us a lot, telling us what work we have to do, can they see the backlog? Often for me, this means directly giving them access. It might be view-only access, but if I'm interacting more than once with someone, I'm going to say, hey, here's a link to our backlog so you can log in and go take a look at it. And then we can keep talking about what exactly it is you need to change or add to our backlog. If I can't do that, I will even in a meeting pull up the backlog instead of just talking with someone about like, so what is it you want us to do? And what is the security requirement? Or what's the design change we need to make to be accessible? I won't sit and take notes in a meeting and then later go add those to my backlog. I will pull up the backlog, share it on screen, and directly begin or editing those requirements with the folks that are feeding those requirements to us so that it immediately becomes part of the way that we move work through our system. That's it. That's what I have to share today.